Hey, good morning. Happy Tuesday. I hope you all had a great first day of your work week, or if it was a work week for you, I don't know. Maybe it wasn't a work day. It was a holiday here yesterday. I had the day off from work. And I had kind of a crappy day, but it's okay. Because guess what? I woke up this morning and I'm like, I'm going to own today. Today's not going to be cruddy like yesterday. Why was yesterday cruddy? I don't even know. I didn't feel good. I was like, bleh, all day long. Achy. I just didn't feel good. I just had one of those days. Every cell in my body was screaming at me to take a nap. And I didn't get one. And then my husband broke my favorite glass cup. Oh well. All right. April 19th. David destroys the Amalekites. 1 Samuel 31 through 31, which was 1010 BC. 3 days later, when David and his men arrived home at their town of Ziklag, they found the Amalekites had made a raid into the Negev and Ziklag. They had crushed Ziklag and burned it to the ground. They had carried off the women and children and everyone else, but without killing anyone. When David and his men saw the ruins and realized what had happened to their families, they wept until they could weep no more. David's two wives, Ahinoam from Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal from Carmel, were among those captured. David was now in great danger because all of his men were very bitter about losing their sons and daughters, and they began to talk of stoning him. But David found strength in the Lord his God. That is a powerful sentence right there. David found strength in the Lord his God. We can all find strength in the Lord. Then he said to Abiathar the priest, "Bring me the ephod." So Abiathar brought it, and David asked the Lord, "Should I chase after this band of raiders? Will I catch them?" And the Lord said to him, "Yes, go after them. You will surely recover everything that was taken from you." So David and his 600 men set out, and they came to the brook of Besor. But 200 of the men were too exhausted to cross the brook, so David continued the pursuit with 400 men. Along the way, they found an Egyptian man in a field and brought him to David. They gave him some bread to eat and water to drink. They also gave him part of a fig cake and 2 clusters of raisins, for he hadn't had anything to eat or drink for 3 days and nights. Before long, his strength returned. "To whom do you belong, and where do you come from?" David asked him. "I am an Egyptian, the slave of an Amalekite," he replied. "My master abandoned me 3 days ago because I was sick. We are on our way from raiding the Kerethites and the Negev, the territory of Judah, and the land of Caleb, and we had just burned Ziklag." "Will you lead me to this band of raiders?" David asked. The young man replied, "If you take an oath in God's name that you will not kill me or give me back to my master, then I will guide you to them." So he led David to them, and they found the Amalekites spread out across the fields, eating and drinking and dancing with joy because of the vast amount of plunder they had taken from the Philistines and the land of Judah. David and his men rushed in among them and slaughtered them throughout the night and the entire next day until evening. None of the Amalekites escaped except 400 young men who fled on camels. David got back everything the Amalekites had taken, and he rescued his 2 wives. Nothing was missing, small or great, son or daughter, nor anything else that had been taken. David brought everything back. He also recovered all the flocks and herds and all of his men and drove them ahead of their livestock. "This plunder belongs to David," they said. Then David returned to the brook of Besor and met with the 200 men who had been left behind because they were too exhausted to go with him. They went out to meet David and his men, and David greeted them joyfully. But some evil troublemakers among David's men said, "They didn't go with us, so they can't have any of the plunder we recovered. Give them their wives and children and tell them to be gone." But David said, No, my brothers, don't be selfish with what the Lord has given us. He has kept us safe and helped us defeat the band of raiders that has attacked us. Who will listen when you talk like this? We share and share alike, those who go into battle and those who guard the equipment. From then on, David made this a decree and regulations for Israel, and it is still followed today. When he arrived at Ziklag, David sent part of the plunder to the elders of Judah, who were his friends. "Here is a present for you, taken from the Lord's enemies," he said. The gifts were sent to the people of the following towns David had visited: Bethel, Ramoth Negev, Jadar, Arior, Siphmoth, Eshtemoa, Rakel, the towns of the Jerahmeelites, the towns of the Kenites, Hormah, Bor Ashan, Athak, Hebron, and all the other places David and his men had visited. 1 Chronicles 12:20 through 22. Here is the list of men from Manasseh who defected to David as he was returning to Ziklag. Adnah, Jozabad, Jediel, Michael, Jozabad, Elihu, Zilithai. Each commanded 1,000 troops from the tribe of Manasseh. They helped David chase down the band of raiders, and they were all brave warriors who became commanders of his army. Day after day, more men joined David until he had a great army, like the army of God. The death of Saul, 1 Samuel 31, 1 through 13. Now the Philistines attacked Israel, and the men of Israel fled before them. Many were slaughtered on the slopes of Mount Gilboa. The Philistines closed in on Saul and his sons, and they killed 3 of his sons, Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua. The fighting grew very fierce around Saul, and the Philistine archers caught up with him and wounded him severely. Saul groaned to his armor-bearer, "Take your sword and kill me before these pagan Philistines come to run through me and taunt me and torture me." But his armor-bearer was afraid and would not do it. So Saul took his own sword and fell on it. When his armor-bearer realized that Saul was dead, he fell on his own sword and died beside his king. So Saul, his 3 sons, his armor-bearer, and his troops all died together that same day. When the Israelites on the other side of Jezreel Valley and beyond Jordan saw that the Israelite army had fled and that Saul and his sons were dead, they abandoned their towns and fled. So the Philistines moved in and occupied their towns. The next day, when the Philistines went out to strip the dead, they found the bodies of Saul and his 3 sons on Mount Gilboa. So they cut off Saul's head and stripped his armor. Then they proclaimed the good news of Saul's death in their pagan temple and to the people throughout the land of Philistia. They placed his armor in the temple of the Ashtaroths, and they fastened his body to the wall in the city of Bethshan. But when the people of Jabesh-Gilead heard what the Philistines had done to Saul, all of their mighty warriors traveled through the night to Bethshan and took the bodies of Saul and his sons down from the wall. They brought them to Jabesh, where they burned the bodies. Then they took their bones and buried them beneath the tamarisk tree at Jabesh, and they fasted for 7 days. 1 Chronicles 10, 1 through 14. Now the Philistines attacked Israel, and the men of Israel fled before them. Many were slaughtered on the slopes of Mount Gilboa. The Philistines closed in on Saul and his sons, and they killed his 3 sons, Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua. The fighting grew very fierce around Saul, and the Philistine archers caught up with him and wounded him. Saul groaned to his armor-bearer, "Take your sword and kill me before these pagan Philistines come to taunt and torture me." But his armor-bearer was afraid and would not do it. So Saul took his own sword and fell on it. When his armor-bearer realized that Saul was dead, he fell on his own sword and died. So Saul and his 3 sons died together, bringing his dynasty to an end. When the Israelites in Jezreel Valley saw that the army had fled and that Saul and his sons were dead, they abandoned their towns and fled. So the Philistines moved in and occupied their towns. The next day, when the Philistines went out to strip the dead, they found the bodies of Saul and his sons on Mount Gilboa. So they stripped off Saul's armor and cut off his head. Then they proclaimed the good news of Saul's death before their idols and the people throughout the land of Philistia. They placed his armor in the temple of their gods, and they fastened his head to the temple of Dagon. But when everyone in Jabesh-Gilead heard about everything the Philistines had done to Saul, all their mighty warriors brought the bodies of Saul and his sons back to Jabesh. Then they buried their bones beneath the great tree at Jabesh, and they fasted for 7 days. So Saul died because he was unfaithful to the Lord. He failed to obey the Lord's command, and he even consulted a medium instead of asking the Lord for guidance. So the Lord killed him and turned the kingdom over to David, son of Jesse. Jonathan's descendants, 1 Chronicles 9, 40 through 44. Jonathan was the father of Merib-Baal. Merib-Baal was the father of Micah. The sons of Micah were Pithon, Melech, Tariah, and Ahaz. Ahaz was the father of Jada. Jada was the father of Alameth, Azmaveth, and Zimri. Zimri was the father of Moza. Moza was the father of Bineah. Bineah's son was Rephaiah. Rephaiah's son was Eleasah. Eleasah's son was Azel. Azel had 6 sons, whose names were Azrikam, Bacharu, Ishmael, Shiriah, Obadiah, and Hanan. These were the sons of Azel. 2 Samuel 4:4. Saul's son Jonathan had a son named Mephibosheth, who was crippled as a child. He was only 5 years old when a report came from Jezreel that Saul and Jonathan had been killed in battle. When the child's nurse heard the news, she picked him up and fled. But as she hurried away, she dropped him, and he became crippled. David learns of Saul's death. 2 Samuel 1 through 16. After the death of Saul, David returned from his victory over the Amalekites and spent 2 days in Ziklag. On the third day, a man arrived from Saul's army camp. He had torn his clothes and put dirt on his head to show he was in mourning. He fell to the ground before David in deep respect. "Where have you come from?" David asked. "I escaped from the Israelite camp," the man replied. "What happened?" David demanded. "Tell me how the battle went." The man replied, Our entire army fled from the battle. Many of the men are dead, and Saul and his son Jonathan are also dead." "How do you know Saul and Jonathan are dead?" David demanded of the young man. The man answered, "I happened to be on Mount Gilboa, and there was Saul leaning on his spear, with the enemy chariots and charioteers closing in on him. When he turned and saw me, he cried out for me to come to him. 'How can I help?' I asked him. He responded, 'Who are you?' 'I am an Amalekite,' I told him. Then he begged me, 'Come over here and put me out of my misery, for I am in terrible pain and want to die.' So I killed him," the Amalekite told David, "for I knew he couldn't live. Then I took his crown and his armband, and I have brought them here to you, my lord." David and his men tore their clothes in sorrow when they heard the news. They mourned and wept and fasted all day for Saul and his son Jonathan, and the Lord's army and the nation of Israel, because they had died by the sword that day. Then David said to the young man who had brought the news, "Where are you from?" And he replied, "I am a foreigner, an Amalekite, who lives in your land." "Why were you not afraid to kill the Lord's anointed one?" David asked. Then David said to one of his men, "Kill him." So the man thrust his sword into the Amalekites and killed him. "You have condemned yourself," David said, "for you yourself confessed that you killed the Lord's anointed one." David's song for Saul and Jonathan, 2 Samuel 1:17 through 27. Then David composed a funeral song for Saul and Jonathan, and he commanded that it be taught to the people of Judah. It is known as the Song of the Bow, and it is recorded in the book of Jasher. "Your pride and joy, O Israel, lies dead on the hills. Oh, how the mighty heroes have fallen. Don't announce the news in Gath. Don't proclaim it in the streets of Ashkelon, or the daughters of the Philistines will rejoice, and the pagans will laugh in triumph. O mountains of Gilboa, let there be no dew or rain upon you, nor fruitful fields producing offering of grain. For there the shield of the mighty heroes was defiled. The shield of Saul will no longer be anointed with oil. The bow of Jonathan was powerful, and the sword of Saul did its mighty work. They shed the blood of their enemies, and pierced the bodies of mighty heroes. How beloved and gracious were Saul and Jonathan! They were together in life and in death. They were swifter than eagles, stronger than lions. O women of Israel, weep for Saul, for he dressed you in luxurious scarlet clothing, in garments decorated with gold. Oh, how the mighty heroes have fallen in battle. Jonathan lies dead on the hills. How I weep for you, my brother Jonathan. Oh, how much I loved you, and your love was deep for me, deeper than the love of women. Oh, how mighty heroes have fallen. Stripped of their weapons, they lie dead." Okay, guys. Thank you for joining me for that. Let's move on to I'll Start Again Monday by Lisa Turkers. We are on day number 8. Okay. Ouch, ouch, ouch. All right, day number 8, making peace with the realities of my body. I have a high school memory that haunted me for years. There was a boy with whom I was completely smitten. When the lights dimmed at school dances somewhere between My Sharona and the Walk Like an Egyptian, inevitably came the sound of Hall and Oates. Your Kiss is on my list. I had a list, and he was at the very top. Good night. I, for years, thought Hall and Oates was hauling oats. I can't believe I just told you that. The only problem was that my crush had a list of his own, and I hadn't even made the cut. To him, we were just friends. Put that little combo together, and it was a formula for heartbreak. Then came the moment that more than 20 years later, I can still recall as if it happened yesterday. List boy comes and sits beside me at the school dance. I try to play cool and act like I'm surprised to see him, like I hadn't noticed him all night, though I had secretly kept an eye on his every move since he'd walked in. We exchanged chit-chat for a few moments. We are only speaking very simple words, but inside of me a whole different thing is happening. My heart is beating out of my chest. My mind is leaping through the pages of our future together, our first dance, our engagement, our wedding. Right as I'm getting around to naming our first 3 children, he drops a bomb on me. He says he thinks I'm pretty cute, but it's too bad I have big ankles. Otherwise, we might be able to go out sometime. Excuse me? Did you just say that I have big, beautiful eyes? Surely you didn't say ankles. No, he replies. I actually said tankles. Seriously? Tankles? I could have imagined him never asking me out because of my frizzy hair or my zits or my braces. All of that would eventually change. But my ankles? Well, they would be my constant companion for life. I eventually matured past my ankles bothering me every minute of every day, just about the time when they were merely a weekly point of contention. I decided to have a little conversation with God about my ankles. I told him this was a silly thing to bring up, but I really needed to have a better perspective on the whole tankle-ankle situation. I think the Lord had actually been eager for me to discuss this with him. He was quick to answer my question with a question. God, are you clumsy, Lisa? Lisa, yes, Lord, I am very clumsy. God, have you ever twisted your ankle? Lisa, never. God, wouldn't it bug you to constantly twist your ankle and be put out of commission? Lisa, yes, very much. God, Lisa, I have perfectly equipped you with the ankles of strength and convenience. Be thankful. The conversation wasn't as clear-cut and back and forth as that, and no, I didn't audibly hear God's voice, but this is the message I got as I sat quietly and prayed about this. Maybe you could try having a similar quiet time with God about whatever your tankle equivalent is and see what he reveals to you. I don't know a woman alive who is completely happy with her body. Not me, probably not you, and not my friend Karen Eman, who lost more than 100 pounds. Karen is one of my most favorite people to dialogue with about weight loss. Karen grew up with a single mom who truly loved her, but couldn't always be available as she wanted to be for her daughter. Many days she'd try to fill the gap in her absence by telling Karen she'd left a box of treats on the counter and she'd rushed off to work another shift. Treats became Karen's comfort, what she'd turn to when she was lonely, sad, or stressed. This pattern became deeply ingrained in Karen, and as the years went by, she ended up with what felt like an impossibly obese state. Through the series of medical scares and reality checks, Karen joined Weight Watchers and lost 100 pounds, and for 3 years she was able to stick with it and keep the weight off. Then her husband lost his job. They had to sell their home. Other stresses mounted and everything started spinning out of control. Suddenly her old patterns of comfort seemed appealing again. Plus, being at her goal weight and still having to watch what she ate without the reward of watching the scale numbers go down wasn't as fun. What started as one treat turned into many. 5 extra pounds turned into 30, and Karen felt the old pangs of defeat tempting her to make a complete reversal of all of her progress. It was time to get serious again, but boy, was it hard the second time around. She knew some things would have to be different. The biggest was shifting her motivation from the delight of seeing the diminishing numbers on the scale to the delight of obedience to God. One of her Weight Loss Wednesday blog posts, she wrote something I found incredibly insightful and profound. I was very hopeful as I hopped on the scale this morning. I kept track of my food, exercised 5 days at the gym for 30 to 45 minutes, and my jeans were zipping up much easier than expected. So I whipped the scale out of its lockdown location. Hopping on the scale more than once a week proves often to be detrimental to me, and it said I lost 1.8 pounds. A measly 1.8 pounds? What? I was sure it would say at least 2 or 3, or 2 or maybe even 3. I felt gypped. I felt like running to the kitchen to make a frozen waffle or two so I could slather it with real butter, spread it with some Peter Pan, and douse it with a load of pure maple syrup to drown my sorrows. Then I stopped and remembered what I felt the Lord saying this week. Define your week by obedience, not by a number on the scale. So I had to stop and ask myself the following questions. Did I overeat this week on any day? No. Did I move more and regularly exercise? Yes. Did I eat in secret out of anger or frustration? No. Did I feel that any time I ran to food instead of to God? Nope. Before I hopped on the scale, did I think I'd have a successful, God-pleasing week? Before I hopped on the scale, did I think I had a successful, God-pleasing week? Yep. So why, oh why, do I get so tied up in a stupid number? And why did I almost let it trip me up and send me to the kitchen for a 750-calorie binge? Sweet friends, we need to define ourselves by our obedience, not a number on the scale. Okay? Pinky promise? Good. We are all in this thing together, and we will get the weight off, even if it is 1.8 pounds at a time. I love the questions Karen tackled. What a great list of questions for me to ask when, though I'm at my goal weight, it's still necessary for me to wear Spanx with some of my dress pants, or when my tankles remind me that skirts aren't my best wardrobe option. The body God has given me is good. It's not perfect, nor will it ever be. I still have cellulite, I still have tankles, and though I eat healthy, there are no guarantees. I'm just as susceptible as the next gal to cancer or some other disease. But my body is a gift, a good gift for which I am thankful. Being thankful and taking care of this gift by walking according to God's plan gives me renewed strength to keep a healthy view of my body. And so, like the psalmist, I can pray this prayer of thanksgiving for the body I have and mean it. Praise the Lord, O my soul. All my inmost being, praise his holy name. Praise the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits, who forgives all your sins and heals all your diseases, who redeems your life from the pit and crowns you with love and compassion, who satisfies your desires with good things, so that your youth is renewed like the eagles. Psalm 103, 1-5. It's so easy to get laser focused on what we see is wrong with our bodies. I knew I could eat healthy and exercise the rest of my life and still have tankles. In the grand scheme of things, this is a shallow concern. But if I allowed my brain to park in a place of dissatisfaction about any part of my body, it would give Satan just enough room to move in with his little lie that strips me of motivation. Your body is never going to look the way you want it to look, so why sacrifice so much? Your discipline is in vain. That's why I have to seek the Lord's perspective. And, as Psalm 103 reminds us, forget not all his benefits. When I studied this scripture and decided to rest in the reality of what a good gift my body is, for the first time in my life, I thanked God for making me just the way he made me. I am able to look at airbrushed, skinny-ankled women on TV and magazines and be happy for them without loathing myself. I just put the word self in there. Without loathing myself. I've found my beautiful, and I like my beautiful. I don't have to hold my beautiful up to others and view it with a critical eye. As Ralph Waldo Emerson once said, though we travel the world over to find the beautiful, we must carry it with us or we find it not. Oh my gosh, that was very, very good. That was very, very good. It's about obedience to God and not about the number on a scale. That is a lesson I work hard on every single day. I have to remind myself that number on the scale is not what defines me. The scale is not an indicator of my worth. It is not an indicator of success. My obedience to God is nourishing my body with foods that keep it healthy as possible so that I can perform the work that I'm meant to perform. That is what matters, not the number on a scale. And that is why during Mindset March, I encouraged all the ladies in my group to put the scale away. Put it away. Put it away. Leave it alone. Many of us use it as an indicator of how we did the day before, but you know what? There are other indicators of how you did the day before. How you feel is an indicator of how the day before went. How, you know what I'm talking about when you eat off plan, or you ate too much sodium, or maybe you were on plan, but it was too much of a crossover. It was too heavy of an S. You don't have to get on the scale to know. You know before you even get on the scale what it's going to say. I have gotten to the point where I can guarantee 100% if the scale is going to be the same, go up a little or go down a little based on how I feel. And does it matter? Does that number matter? Or does my obedience to my king, is that what matters? Something to think about. All right, you guys, I loved you. I loved you. I love you. I didn't love you in the past. I love you still. Thank you for joining me. I hope that you have a blessing from this, and I hope you find it beneficial. So I need to let the dog out in the pouring rain. It is downpouring, but he wants to go out, so I need to let the dog out, and then I need to have a relatively quick breakfast this morning because I have an appointment at the surgeon's office. So, okay, you guys, I'll see you back tomorrow for more devotions, and I'll see you in just a few minutes for breakfast. Don't ask me what I'm going to make because I don't know. I'm still thinking about it. I'll let you know when I start breakfast. Have a great day, guys. Bye.